China's been taking a lot of hits lately, but it's got a master plan for 2030, and it's already in trouble. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is made possible thanks to this week's sponsor, Outskill. Outskill has trained more than 10 million people around the world, including a lot of China Uncensored viewers who have found it really valuable. Light artist 1863 said he attended the Outskill Mastermind seminar and completed it, and it was worth it. Debbie Paducah commented they hadn't realized how far artificial intelligence has come and what can be done. It's not just a plug, it's a game changer. When you attend, in just 16 hours, you'll learn how to build AI agents, automate workflows, connect all your software tools together, and use AI to save tons of time every week. There are a lot of AI training courses out there, but Outskill is different. They'll show you practical things, including how to actually make thousands of extra dollars a week using AI. Plus, when you complete the training, you'll get free bonuses worth $5,100, including an AI prompt Bible, a roadmap to monetize your AI skills, and a personalized AI toolkit builder. And you'll get this AI survival hack book that will help you stay ahead of the curve. Outskill will be hosting their next 2-day AI mastermind training this Saturday and Sunday. It's from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on both days. So if you are making the most out of AI to save you time and make money, sign up with my link below or using the QR code to get this training for free. Back to the show. So, China just ended its biggest political meeting of the year, the 2 sessions, where the National People's Congress, or NPC, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the CPPCC, signaled China's priorities and hash out details behind closed doors. This year's 2 sessions is especially important because of 2027, the year by which Xi Jinping wants the Chinese military to be prepared for a potential Taiwan takeover. And when Xi will most likely hope to secure a 4th term in office during the 21st Party Congress. It's like an October surprise, but less of a surprise and more of a long-anticipated invasion. The lead up to the 2 sessions has been insane, including purges galore. I talked about that 2 days ago. So if you didn't hear about it, then it's because YouTube is suppressing China Uncensored again. This year's 2 sessions meeting comes at a critical time. China's economy is crumbling like Chinese buildings. It's suffering from what I like to call the ABCDs: all-time high debt levels, birth rate decline, consumer confidence crisis, and deflation. And also dummies in charge. So I guess the ABC double Ds. That's why at the top of the agenda this time around is approving the 15th Five-Year Plan, a blueprint for how Beijing aims to drive its economic growth into the next decade from 2026 to 2030. Leave it to the CCP to take the most annoying part of a job interview where they say, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" and make it their entire personality. On top of that, China faces a resurgent America that's moving fast to change the geopolitical landscape to compete against China both economically as well as militarily, as we see happening against China's friends like Venezuela and Iran, and possibly Cuba in 3, 2, 1. So, what is China planning for the next 5 years? Well, for one, China has set a 4.5% to 5% GDP growth rate as its target for 2026. That's the lowest target on record since 1991. Now here's what's interesting about that. For years, the CCP has reported that China has consistently hit its GDP growth targets, which, if true, should mean that they have no problem keeping the higher growth targets of the past years. But you and I know that just about all official data coming out of China is fake. Even CCP officials like former Chinese Premier Li Keqiang admitted that China's key economic figures like GDP are man-made and therefore unreliable. The thing is, a non-market regime like China needs high numbers to bamboozle investors and governments. Luckily for China, there are plenty of other double D dummies out there gullible enough to fall for it. And lower-level officials also need those shiny numbers, at least on paper, to kiss up to higher-level Chinese officials just to make them look competent and avoid being purged. So we can say with a pretty good level of certainty that China has not been meeting its growth targets, even though it says it has. But the fact that China's lowering its official GDP goals to around 4.5% to 5% goes to show that not even tweaking the numbers is enough to hide how bad things have gotten. China, of course, will never say any of that outright. Instead, they're advertising this lower GDP growth rate as a way to allow greater policy flexibility, enabling localities to focus on high-quality economic growth as their primary goal, and more importantly, place greater focus on people's livelihoods. Because it's illegal to be sad in China, remember? Smile, or else. See, it's nothing more than a recalibration, structural optimization, and quality enhancement. If there's one thing the CCP is actually good at, it's producing word salad. So you see, the lower GDP goal isn't a bad thing, it's just a further shift from a numbers-first mindset towards a quality-first one. This includes hopes of doubling China's 2020 per capita GDP by 2035. Which shouldn't be hard given that China's facing a birth rate crisis and a rapidly aging society. So if higher GDP growth isn't the goal, how is China hoping to improve its economy and achieve this magical doubling of per capita GDP by 2035? Well, during the two sessions, Chinese leader Xi Jinping put a lot of emphasis on developing new quality productive forces. It's a term that's been thrown around since at least September of 2023. It basically means China wants to use state intervention to develop cutting-edge technologies like AI, quantum computing, robotics, biomedicine, semiconductors, batteries, and 6G mobile networks, while relying less on foreign countries like the US to do so. Except, of course, for stealing all that tech from the US, but that doesn't count as relying on them, right? China's overreaching goal is to transform from a low-cost manufacturing to a tech-driven economy. But there's a problem. For decades, China's economy has been running on ever-rising debt and investment into infrastructure, especially real estate. But then in the early 2020s, China's real estate bubble popped. And popped is the kind word. A more accurate phrase would be, it collapsed harder figuratively than their buildings do literally. China is trying to shift its economy away from the old system, but it has never recovered from the fallout that followed. In more ways than one. In fact, it continues to plague China. Local governments, which have historically relied on land sales, are resorting to whatever it takes to scrape by, even if it means ruining China's economy in the long term. Short-term gain for long-term, oh God, what have you done? I'm ruined. But don't worry, the two sessions has a plan for that too, increasing general public budget expenditures to over 30 trillion yuan for the first time. Because local governments taking on massive debt just to stay afloat is what caused the problem in the first place. Taking on massive debts at the national level, what's the worst that could happen? China's also increased its central general public budget to over 15 trillion yuan. Which leaves a central government deficit of 5.09 trillion yuan. It's like they saw they were eating themselves and thought, I know, let's start eating faster. On top of that, China has set ultra-long-term special treasury bonds at 1.3 trillion yuan for the central government to continue major national projects and new development initiatives. I wish I had that level of optimism to think they'll be able to pay those off. Did I say optimism? I meant delusion. Seems nice. Meanwhile, 4.4 trillion yuan of local government special purpose bonds will be issued mainly for the construction of key projects, hidden debt swaps, and the settlement of overdue payments owed by governments. This is in addition to increased payments from the central government to local governments. Which is basically the CCP admitting that their system of sending most of the country's income to the top and most of the country's expenditures to the local governments has led to said local governments eating the country's economy in order to survive and saying, okay, now we'll bail you out this time, which changes absolutely nothing in the long term. Yay, communism! There's also 300 billion yuan in special treasury bonds to replenish capital for major state-owned banks to help their lending capacity. So yeah, there's a lot of spending going on. There's just one problem. All of the spending is just a band-aid on problems that run deep in China's economy, like really deep. And the revenue to keep up with this spending just isn't there. Local governments have cut their revenue targets for this year, which implies the local governments are finding it hard to earn enough money and may end up relying more and more on the central government to solve their debt problems, which I'm sure will work out fine. I mean, when has relying on communism to solve your economic woes ever failed? Not counting every time it's been attempted. And if China's debt keeps growing, it could easily lead to a death spiral where most or all of the country's revenue is used to pay off interest and roll over old debts. One way to solve this problem is to develop a stronger domestic consumer economy, and the CCP knows that. To address weak domestic consumer demand, the CCP has set aside a 100 billion yuan special fiscal financial fund and put out subsidies for things like employment, medicine, childcare, and the elderly. Not to mention revitalization and development projects in areas with large economic minority populations, which I'm sure will be very helpful for the Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other minorities China's trying to erase. But China is still refusing to do anything that will fundamentally make itself a real consumer economy, despite what Chinese state-run media would have you believe. That's because China hates the idea of giving consumers too much power. There's another problem. China's push for new quality productive forces encourages involution, the kind of cutthroat competition that makes it wildly unprofitable to do business and results in ridiculously excessive production like we see with cheap, crappy Chinese solar panels and EVs. Yes, cheap Chinese labor is hurting cheap Chinese labor. Congratulations, you played yourself. China is supposedly addressing involution by putting in place capacity regulations, energy standards, and quality supervision, as well as strengthening measures that restrict local governments from using illegal subsidies to sustain zombie enterprises, which are enterprises that basically are dead but still kicking. Not the name of Netflix workplace comedy. But if China is pushing hard to nurture emerging future industries, then wasteful spending, especially in a communist society like China, is inevitable. And if the world puts more tariffs and other trade restriction measures against cheap Chinese crap, and there's not enough domestic demand for the goods, then new quality productive forces could evolve into another wave of large-scale overcapacity, further eroding corporate profit margins, which in turn could trigger mass unemployment. I'm starting to think the CCP told people to eat bitterness because before too long that might be the only thing they can afford to eat. But guess what else is getting in the way of an economic miracle? China's obsession with security. China's planning on boosting defense spending by 7% this year. It's a slightly lower percentage than in previous years, but this is not China scaling back military spending like what Bloomberg asserts. It is still a 7% increase in spending, which means China is still very much set on preparing for something like, starting a world war. This could partially explain why we're seeing China put so much emphasis on increasing grain output, as well as energy. To sum up, the CCP is clearly aware that China's economy is in a bad way, and they're trying to do something about it, but everything they're trying is just more of what they've tried before. Concentrate power at the top, spend money like it's going out of style, act like a jerk on the world stage, and beef up the military to deal with the inevitable backlash. Not to mention purges. Let's not forget the purges, which don't exactly provide incentives for local officials to report things honestly. As a result, China's economic outlook for 2026 appears highly pessimistic. To them, that's my prediction as an optimist. I sure can't wait to see the CCP absolutely mess up the Chinese economy, but we'll have to wait and see how this plays out, especially once Trump and Xi meet again in a few weeks in Beijing. When that happens, be sure to check out this channel for an in-depth analysis and probably some 90s Nintendo references, the hallmark of high-quality geopolitical commentary. But here's the one takeaway I want you to get. There are people out there, especially among those working in mainstream media outlets and think tanks, who love to parrot the idea that China wins no matter what it or other countries like the US do, like they unlocked a real-life Game Genie code. Told you about the 90s Nintendo references. Many especially love making China out to be the winner in order to make Trump look bad. But that's nonsense. China makes mistakes like any other country, and it only wins if we allow it to win. We can't allow China to win economically or militarily, which is why we need people to point out how China is not as strong as it makes itself out to be, especially when they're suffering from a terminal case of the ABC double Ds. And if you're not skilled in using AI yet, there's still a chance to upgrade yourself quickly. Click my link below and register for OutSkill's free AI training this weekend. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching China Uncensored.